Hello, I'm Ron, a former board member for NA World Services, or NAWS. As you probably know, the pandemic has hit NAWS very hard, causing it to furlough about half its staff and bringing nearly to a halt the majority of its service efforts. As more and more of us have become aware of this, many of us have stepped up to help. Lots of questions have come up as well. What is NAWS exactly? And if I do contribute directly to it as a member, what does NAWS do with the money? Of course, there are reports and publications that answer this in great detail, but let me try to paint the picture. Let's take a tour around the World Service Office in Chatsworth, California. I hope you get a chance to do that in person one day. It's an inspiring place. Meanwhile, if you want to know in more detail, just visit NA.org and search for the annual report, or browse around this site, TJCNA.org. Let's start our tour in the Fellowship Services Department. It's hard to get anyone's attention in here because they're fully engaged with the fellowship, or preparing training materials, or planning events, and responding to the continuous stream of requests from the fellowship around the world. So let's leave them alone and step back out into the hall. I'll tell you a couple of Fellowship Services stories. Some years back, NAWS found itself in contact with lots of small NA communities that were springing up in Russia and neighboring countries. As with NA Anywhere, growth was slow for each isolated community. It occurred to Fellowship Services, because they are in direct contact with the fellowship worldwide, that if those isolated Russian-speaking communities could get connected with one another, maybe they would see the kind of growth that NA communities generally experience when we find each other and join forces. And when I say they were isolated, by the way, realize that Russia is a country that spans something like 11 time zones, so the space between those communities was vast and resources were short. NAWS decided to go for it and held a workshop in which one or more members from each of these communities would be funded to get together in one place, to meet each other, to discuss their shared challenges, and to come up with solutions. Words can't express the joy and inspiration and sense of purpose that these members generated. This energy in turn sparked a flurry of service efforts in that part of the world that has produced the truly impressive Russian-speaking fellowship that exists today, with several mature regions and several emerging regions learning and growing in an atmosphere of mutual support. There is nearly an identical story about the Arab-speaking fellowship in the Middle East. NAWS played the part of bringing people together and helping to equip them to support one another, and the local fellowships collaborated with one another to do the rest. Just pre-pandemic, this same pattern was unfolding in Africa and will continue when we get to the, quote, new normal. All throughout Europe, the Asia Pacific, Latin America, Canada, these stories have been playing out for many years, with NAWS paying close attention, facilitating as needed, providing resources sometimes, partnering where useful. But NAWS has learned over time that coming in once with a bang generates lots of feeling and many good intentions, but the board and staff need to stay with it, particularly in the early going, and return a couple more times to follow up and to be a reliable partner. The result of this work in the form of transformed lives is incalculable. Let's head down the hallway a bit now. As we pass the translations department, I'll just mention that NA literature is now being published in around 60 languages, with several more in progress. Just imagine the rich and fruitful, but also resource-intensive work being done behind those doors, in partnership with the many translation committees all around the world. Now we're getting to the part of the office that the staff calls Writer's Row. In one office, someone is in deep concentration, trying to describe in simple terms the complex issues she's breaking down for the next conference agenda report. But we broke her concentration, so let's politely move on. In each office, someone is working on one of the many reports, periodicals, and even drafts of our next pieces of literature, as input is being consolidated from the hundreds of or thousands of members who now participate in that process. This place is deep in concentration and deadlines are looming. Let's tiptoe along. There are many more offices to visit, but the tour group behind us is getting impatient, so we'll just walk by the offices of the senior administration, accounting, and HR that are needed to keep any operation this size running smoothly. Did you know that NAWS has not only this office, but branch offices in Iran, Canada, Europe, and India? And what do you suppose the event planning efforts look like to pull off a world convention like the one with over 20,000 of us in attendance in Orlando last time? Not to mention those world conventions that NAWS has held and will hold again in various other countries around the world. And what about the efforts that go into designing and producing literature? The implications in terms of lives saved by the work in this office starts to become dizzying. Well, let's peek quickly into the warehouse on our way out. This place is huge. It looks like that scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark in here. If we had time and if they weren't so busy filling orders, we'd turn out the lights and meditate for just a moment in the glow of those huge piles of one-year key tags being shipped all over the world in all those languages. Watch out for the forklift as it moves pallets of books into position to be shipped out, including the hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of free and reduced price literature NAWS sends out every year at a loss to places that wouldn't be able to afford it otherwise. This includes all those books heading into prisons in response to the many addicts reaching out to the only address some of them have for NA. But let's head outside. As awe-inspiring as this place is, it's exhausting. So there's a sneak peek at your World Service office. This is all mostly on life support right now, as we are starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel in this pandemic. Together, we will bring it all the way back and continue to support it into the future, I have no doubt. The pandemic has made clear the wisdom of our seventh tradition. Bringing literature sales nearly to a halt has brought this service center and the efforts of its special workers nearly to a halt as well. I, for one, have set up a recurring monthly contribution in the amount I can afford to give in the hopes that our collective individual contributions will provide sufficient stability that this work that NAWS is doing on our behalf will never get interrupted like that again.